All right, welcome to another episode of Behind the Human. I'm your host, Marc Champagne, and it is my job to unpack the stories and mental fitness practices of people living at the top of their game personally and professionally. Today I'm speaking with meditator, writer, and speaker Diego Perez. He is also known by his pen name, Young Pueblo, which means young people, and is meant to convey that humanity is entering an era of remarkable growth and healing when many will expand their self-awareness and release old burdens. During a silent vipassana meditation course in 2012, Diego saw that real healing and liberation were possible. He became more committed to his meditation practice while living in New York City. The results he witnessed firsthand moved him to describe his experiences in writing, something I am super thankful and millions of others I'm sure are also thankful for. So welcome to the show, Diego.
Thank you so much for having me, Marc. I'm super excited to be here.
So am I to have you. I mean, your words are just, you probably never get tired of hearing this, but it's probably nice to hear it. Your words are just so beautiful. And, it's amazing what a couple words strung together, what they can do, right? It's remarkable.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's interesting, receiving positive feedback like that. And I just it helps me see that I'm doing my job right, because I'm really trying to bring high quality things through a minimalistic format. So yeah. I'm just glad it's serving people well.
It definitely is. It's actually, my wife came across your work and she's like, have you ever heard of this guy? I feel like he'd be fantastic for the show. And here we are. So I'm thankful for that. Before we jump into your work, I ask the same question to every guest on this show, just to get an idea, behind the titles and how in the work that you're consumed with, just to get an idea on who the person is. And it's simply, who are you, Diego? As we sit here today, who's the person? How do you define yourself, at least today?
I think my identity is most based in being a meditator. That's why I always describe myself first as I'm a meditator. I'm a writer second. I really enjoy writing, but if it weren't for meditating, I would have never been able to crack open that inner creativity that was just deeply buried underneath all this old conditioning that was just holding my life back. Yeah. But yeah, I see myself as even the way I set up my schedule, the way I set up my life, my year, it's I'll set aside my meditation retreats and then I'll fit everything else in between it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I definitely want to get a bit of the backstory because meditation wasn't always a part of your life. I wrote down something to the effect that I think it was around when you were in your early 20s where, you were using drugs and heading down a dark path. And then, you go from that to inspiring millions with your words and writings and teachings. What's the in between there? What sparked the writing, or I should say the first time to really look at meditation?
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. I was heading down a really dark path. I was really sort of consumed by being driven by pleasure so that I could hide from my pain, essentially. Every time I would feel any tension in my mind or depression would come up, I would immediately try to just totally fill myself with pleasure, whether it was through drugs or partying all the time or just using that as an avenue to run away from myself. And eventually that helped me develop horrible habits, where I was just out all the time. I wasn't doing that well while I was in university. And after I graduated, I kind of just crashed. There was one night where I just pushed it too far and I felt like I was dying. I literally felt like my life was on the brink.
Wow.
Yeah. And I kind of prayed myself back into existence and just really remembered my parents in that moment, thought a lot about how much they sacrificed, because I was born in Ecuador. So I'm an immigrant, a proud one too. And they sacrificed so much to get us over here and we experienced so much poverty that I was like, man, am I just going to die like this? I'm just going to die using drugs and doing nothing with my life. But I was able to just will myself out of that and start slow positive habit building, start like slow radical awareness, like radical honesty, where
Yeah.
I was just like really trying to do the opposite of what I was doing before, just be with myself whenever something difficult would come up inside of my mind.
How did you know to do that? Like how, like from, seeing your parents and coming to that realization to, okay, I don't want, I want this to stop, or I want to take ownership and move forward. But how do you, I'm thinking of anyone that's in that place right now, like what was your first step?
Yeah, when I was doing so, like right, literally that moment after I like threw the drugs away, flushed them down the toilet, I the next few days I started pondering a lot about what led me to this point,
Mm,
and I knew that it was this constant running away. So I was like, if I'm constantly lying to myself, I was like, would just not admit that I was feeling a lot of anxiety, would not admit that I was feeling so much sadness. Um, my thing was, it lying led me here, so honesty can bring me back to a good place. And that just kind of clicked intuitively, and I was like, okay,
okay.
like let me just build this new habit of honesty.
I love that. I love that. And then, I'm super tactical with this stuff because as we were chatting about before hitting record, I'm really big about on mental fitness,
Yeah,
and I'm a huge believer that just like exercise, if someone's going to go run a marathon and that's their thing to train, if you don't like training for a marathon, doesn't mean exercise is wiped out. So I really want to try to give people a whole slew of options. So what were some of meditation? Obviously came up at one point. We can dive into that. But was there anything else that was helping you stay in that honesty or explore that honesty?
yeah, I think it came, there was like a few big things. It wasn't just the honesty, but it was this like slow, peeling back and being honest about how much I had ignored my body, and
Oh,
how little I was just like, I wasn't feeding my body any nutrition. So in terms of like mental fitness, I remember noticing immediately the moment that I started consuming superfoods. That was like, I remember I bought like a tub of barley grass, and pretty quickly within a week I was like, oh, my mind feels a little clearer, like I can think a little better.
yeah.
And as soon as I started like injecting like high nutritional food, like I didn't even change my diet yet, I was still eating the same kind of heavy dense food that wasn't nurturing me, but instead of just taking all that out, I started adding in really good food as well. And that made a huge difference, and it was like slow like peeling back of all of that. And then I started, just addressing my diet, still like enjoying things, but just not taking it over the edge.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. So yeah, so let's talk about the first meditation retreat and what that was all about, because or what it was like, because I've heard a few times now, and actually, I was giving a talk around mental fitness for a company a few weeks ago, and someone actually asked about some research that recently came out around some suicides coming out of meditation, and that was kind of the only context. And I was like, that seems a bit far-fetched, but I suspect it might be some off cases where it's like a silent meditation retreat, depending on what people are coming in with and who the
Yeah.
guides
Yeah.
are. That I've heard Tim Ferriss talk about that as well from his personal experience. And when I read the article, that's exactly what it was. So I'd love to just hear your perspective on all this, because it's a huge tool, but I think people have to also know
Oh,
what they're getting into.
but it's not for everybody, that's something that I really try to let like my audience know. Like I specifically write for people who are not meditators. I write for
Okay.
people who are just like, the masses of people who are first entering their own personal transformation.
Yeah.
So I try to just help people understand themselves intellectually and build like a new mental framework for their own progress. But in that, I tell people you should find a tool, you should find something, but that can be anything from journaling to one-on-one therapy to, you know, lighter forms of meditation to like very serious forms of meditation, like what I practice. But
Yeah.
but the key is finding something that challenges you without overwhelming you.
Mm,
Because like my mental conditioning is very different from your mental conditioning. Like that, all of us are incredibly unique in what we've experienced emotionally. So if you want to do that deconditioning work, you need to make sure that you do it at your own pace.
yeah.
And it's, it's a very tender thing, but it's totally, something that you need to watch out for. Like meditating, especially very intensely, is not for everyone. For me, it turned out to be exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
And it totally fit me. And it, helps me just flourish immensely in terms of like my own personal happiness, my own inner peace. And like, I'm not perfect at all. I got tons that I need to work on, but I wouldn't have gotten here if I, didn't go to like a silent 10-day course and
Yeah.
basically help clean my mind.
Yeah, I love that. Well,
Yeah.
and my intent with that comment is definitely not to scare anyone. I think by default, I mean,
No, yeah.
if you want to default to meditation, it's probably a good thing. It's served me very well over the years as well. But I think you make a good point. It's just, again, like anything, it doesn't matter whether it's meditation or sport or other activities. I mean, you've got to, do your research and know what you're getting into, and to your point, know what you need or what feels right. And anything in the extremes, I mean, you've got to take a look at it, right? So maybe you ease
Yeah.
into something.
Yeah, totally. I think it is such a case by case situation, and like, yeah, definitely people, I mean, it's with anything. Like they try therapy, they try meditation. It's just like not for them.
Yeah.
Fantastic. It's not for you. Great.
Yeah.
But you should continue going out there, because that's the special thing about the world we live in today, is that because of globalization, like we're so interconnected that we have like more access than before to so many different amazing practices. So whether
Yeah.
it's, therapy or different forms of meditation, and there's even, indigenous practices, there's just so much that can help you tap into yourself and just like start that personal transformation journey.
Yeah. I think the key is, be open,
Yeah.
explore,
Yeah.
and kind of enjoy that journey. So, but let's talk about your first meditation experience, because I haven't heard, actually. I mean, I've listened to a few podcasts now that you've been on, just preparing for the show, but I don't recall hearing just what that experience was like. Because going from where you were to, it sounds like you were taking some small steps and daily steps to start to heal and build that self-awareness, do some reflection and whatnot. And then, you jumped into this retreat. Like when you arrived the first few days, like, how are you feeling?
I All I could think about was running away.
Okay.
Yeah, for the first few days, as soon as you get there, as soon as you start meditating and you start just like putting yourself through that process, like all this like old junk just starts coming up. Like all this old stuff, that you've accumulated throughout your life will start just slowly unbinding itself and finding its way out of your mind. And sometimes it's feels intense. Like it just feels like you're
Yeah.
cleaning yourself out, like you're cleaning out an old wound. Um, but as the days passed, as I understood more and more of what we were doing there, it was like around day 7 where I really kind of buckled down and realized, like, okay, it's not worthwhile to try to escape. Like I'm here. Let me just give it a good, like at least 80% of my effort. and,
Yeah.
and I ended up getting so much out of it, like it was hard. It was painful, and I had never been tested like that before in my life, but the rewards like were so much bigger than the amount of effort that I put in. Like I felt like the rate of return for the investment was just humongous. Like I put in a certain amount and I ended up getting like 300%. I described it to my friends afterwards. I told them that, we had all gone to college together, and I was like, I learned more in these 10 days than I did in 4 years of college, like hands down.
Wow.
And I felt just, my mind felt lighter than it ever had felt before, which was incredible, from having to carry this weight for so many years. And I was like, I can feel my emotions and it doesn't scare me.
Wow.
And I can I can think and I can be present and I can have compassion for other people. And if someone says something that I don't like, it doesn't ruin my day. It's
Yeah.
like, it was just such a big shift immediately afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I imagine because you're probably, especially with the drugs, just numbing out those past emotions, right? For sure. And then when, and I promise we'll definitely get to your latest book as well, because it's so
No rush.
so beautifully done. But when did then the words start to come to fruition for you? Because I don't think you didn't identify you were heavily involved in activism type work, right? prior
Yeah,
to?
yeah, yeah. I was involved. Since I was like 15 years old, I was always pretty. I just understood that the world could be better. Like we could
Yeah.
better organize this world. It could be much more humanistic, much more caring, compassionate. Um, and yeah, I did a lot of really good work in Boston with this group called Boston Youth Organizing Project, and it was just a powerful group of people. Man, we would come together and just make like literal material change in our
Wow.
environments, in our schools, in our city. We'd like change laws. We would do a lot.
Okay.
But it was a big shift. Like when I started meditating, I felt like the creativity slowly started opening up. I remember after I meditated, I wrote like one tiny little poem after the first 10-day course, and then I didn't write anything else for months. But it was after my third 10-day course where I felt something pretty clear. I was like, you don't know everything. You're not totally healed. You're like totally in the middle or beginning of your journey, but right. Just right. Like let people know that healing is even possible.
Yeah.
Because to me, like, this is 2012, like 2012, early 2013. This is before self love hit social media really hard. This is before like all the big people who are out now who are, just helping people change their lives in a very realistic way.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that healing was possible. And it
Yeah.
blew my mind that I was like, yo, this is real. Like I'm not lying to myself right now.
Yeah.
So I just started writing and I started taking little bits that I understood and putting them into tiny poems.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and then like I think we need to get, because we're probably roughly around the same age. Just ignore the early gray hair here. But I mean, our parents just weren't. I don't think we're conditioned to
No.
talk about feelings, emotions, any of that. Like I'm in a men's group, and that's all it is. It's just purely kind of unpacking that. And I have a 5-year-old, and some of the guys in the group have kids as well, and we're just doing everything we can as men to show that's okay to express emotion, right? So it's not surprising, right, to hear what you just mentioned.
No, and it's funny for our generation, right? Because we're in new terrain. Like this
Yeah,
hasn't really been done as far as we know in terms of history, because it's just been about survival. Like
it's
people have
totally
been like, how can I get from point A to point B and I can't worry about my emotions right now? And especially like, from where I'm coming from, like from Ecuador, like we're coming from a really poor background. Like my parents, my mom, she used to clean houses, and my dad, worked in a supermarket. So they
yeah,
were working like the most, low paying jobs, really honest work, but all they could think about was making ends meet. And it was
yeah,
interesting because they didn't have venues or mediums to deal with their own emotions, that pressure of poverty that was really structural in our home just caused so much friction because they didn't know how to process what they were feeling.
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, they're just trying to do their absolute best and
Hmm.
show up with what they've been given essentially in terms of that training, which is basically nothing from their generation. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited. Like I resonate with you being in a place when you were first starting this work, and there was not a lot of people talking about that healing's possible and whatnot. And I saw that as well when I had started a digital journaling app about 4 years ago, which is
Mm.
how this podcast actually started. And at that time, even that time, I would talk about journaling. People would be like, well, wait a second, you're talking about the 12-year-old girl writing about the boy at school in her diary? I said, not necessarily, but there's nothing wrong with that. But
Yeah.
no, that like 100% of people are doing some sort of reflection. To me, that's all journaling is that you're pausing the autopilot, whether you're doing that pen to paper, or taking a walk, but you're thinking, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
just, and it seemed like there was this like hidden percentage of people that were doing it a little bit more intentionally and consciously, or prioritizing that practice in their life, that just had, to use some of your words, just a cleaning of the mind
Yeah.
effect, right?
Yeah. And it's quite interesting because people don't realize that it takes introspection for you to become the best version of yourself.
Yeah,
And it takes, when you're able to to really get to know yourself and love yourself and just deepen your understanding of your own patterns, that gives you the ability to let go, to understand, okay, what am I holding on to? What is not serving me? What can I let go of? And the moment that you start that letting go process, that helps you shift from your average sort of human habit, the things that you, because a lot of times, like historically, it's been, understood, especially in the Western world, that like your human nature is actually like fear, craving, greed.
Yeah.
But in reality, I would push against that, and I would say, no, that's human habit. That's what we have
Mm,
like evolutionarily developed to survive, and even not just evolutionarily, but like in our own personal lives. But when you start getting to know yourself and you start loving yourself, you peel back those layers of human habit and you get real human nature, which is love, compassion, sympathetic joy, an abundance of creativity. You're able to see problems in a new way and solve them. And you just have a whole new energy for life. So if you
yeah.
want to be the best version of yourself, if you want to activate your human nature, you got to be introspective and you got to find your own tool to navigate your inner forest.
Yeah. So how do you remain kind to yourself going through that process? Because it is, well, it's probably a lifelong process, and
Mm-hmm.
probably by habit we're pretty mean to ourselves. I mean, it's like, if we had to pick one person to be mean to, it's probably we're the worst with ourselves. And
Yeah.
the deeper you go, at least I found this, especially going down the journaling route, I almost felt like as I became more and more self-aware, you start feeling things, you start seeing things that were always there. And I was thinking, wow, like, is this good or bad? Is this like, am I just more self-aware, or like, am I legit anxious right now? I mean, there was almost like a blurry part in that journey. And now I know that most likely it's probably a combination of both, but more so just being more and more self-aware and being okay with what was coming up and learning how to process that. But still, I mean, I struggle with it as well. Just, comparison and this and that. Like, so are there any things that are working well for you that allow you to catch yourself when you're in that zone or mindset?
Yeah, I've been, trying to understand this problem because I'm totally living with the same thing too. I think we all are. Um, but understanding that it's being driven by this like sense of immediate perfection where you like
Mm,
immediately you're like, oh, I understand this intellectually. So now through my daily life, I need to be able to just like act this way and be this way and, constantly live at 100%. And I'm realizing how attached we are to this idea of perfection. And it's just like a constant letting go. And as opposed to just, expecting perfection from myself, understand that this is all about gradual step by step development where, every day is not going to be a great day, but as long as I have a upward trajectory, in that upward trajectory, there are still going to be ups and downs. But it's something that I constantly have to remind myself of. And you just have to like literally practice it. It's like, oh, okay, there's perfection in my mind. And now I'm going to stop putting energy towards it because that's one thing. It's like tension is going to keep arising in the mind,
yeah.
but are you going to feed that tension?
Ooh, I like that. I like that. When it comes to your writing, is it essentially your personal journaling first, or is it a combination of something else where you're writing a book and you're trying to bring together some themes or some topics and whatnot, and then you're sitting down and writing from that place? How does it work for you?
It's funny. It's making me laugh even thinking about it, but a lot of it is just like observations. It's like
Mm,
things I'm observing inside of myself. And then one of the best ones is like when I am able to observe it inside of myself, and then I'm interacting with, my loved ones around me, and I'm like, oh wait, you struggle with the same thing too. So like, let me put words to these patterns that we're all dealing with. And
yeah.
so it's constantly just like pattern finding. Honestly, and it's funny because a lot of people write to me and they're like, "Yo, are you reading my mind? Like, how are you able to tell me this thing that is exactly what I'm dealing with in the morning?"
Yeah.
When I post at like
You
10,
should just
ten
say
15
yes.
a.m.
Algorithms.
No, and it's really what Jiddu Krishnamurti, it's what he
Yeah.
said. He's like, you think you're different, like you
Yeah.
think you're, your own. Like, yeah, you may have a unique emotional history, but at the end of the day, you're dealing with perfectionism. I'm dealing with perfectionism. You're dealing with sadness. I'm dealing with sadness. Like,
Yeah.
you have tons of attachments. I have tons of attachments. So when we can speak in like a general sense about the human condition, like, dude, that's going to fit 80% of us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Totally. So the first book, Inward, which again, I mean, all your writing is so beautiful. It's just one of those books that you just pick up and immediately, you read a sentence and at least for me, I look up and start to think type thing, or stare out the window, which is awesome, because anything that can help me pause the autopilot of life or
That's right.
society,
Yeah.
is I see as a gift. So first of all, thank you for that, and from everyone else as well. I just wanted to know, before we get into the new book, but just going through and writing Inward and getting it out there. And man, I think I was listening to an interview with you on Dan Harris's show. And at that point, he mentioned something that you had around like 500,000 or 600,000 followers on Instagram, and this wasn't that long ago, and you're well over 1 million at this point. I'm just curious, like, if you had to chalk it all up to kind of one central theme, what did you learn going through putting that book on the market?
Oh man, that's a great question. What I learned is consistency is everything. If you can keep going, and even when it's hard, just like keep going. One thing that I've seen over and over again is I've seen a lot of amazing, wise, creative artists just give up, and they just stop. And people how I thought, I'm like, yo, this person is fire. Like, they're way talented, way more talented than I am, and they stop. And
Yeah.
when, eventually, like, especially with today's, the way social media works now, like, you'll find your own niche, you'll find your community, or people who will totally appreciate your work, whatever type of artwork you're doing. Because we find each other, we literally find each other through hashtags and algorithms. So, but once you find your group, like, it'll just keep blossoming from there. But I've seen a lot of people just kind of call it quits. And I think that's in one of the ways where, I succeeded, was like, I just keep going. And I just keep going back to the drawing board, because the main thing to me, like, I almost feel like an accidental poet. Like,
Explain. Yeah.
yeah, I didn't, like, to me, what's most important is the message. Is like, I'm trying to say something, but what's the best medium to deliver that in? And at the moment, I think when I started back in 2014, like, really intentionally trying to develop this Young Pueblo thing, everybody was hanging out on Instagram. And
Yeah.
and I started seeing like amazing people like Rupi Kaur and RM Drake. I was getting so inspired by them. And I was like, man, black and white is the bomb. Like, I love minimalism too. And I felt like I had a different message than they had. So I was like, okay, let me see, how can I compose this message? And then I started putting my message out there. And at the same time, I was also reading a lot of Herman Hesse. So like, his lyrical ability with words influenced the way that I was shaping words. And then people were like, "Oh, you're a poet," and I was like, "Oh man, I didn't even know."
I guess so.
Yeah, I was like, "Sure." That's why I always call myself a writer, because like the I like flexibility, and I don't, I
Yeah.
don't want to. I love writing essays too. That's one of my favorite things.
Okay.
So yeah, sometimes they're lyrical, sometimes they're not.
Yeah. Well, I just love it. I mean, you're like anything that usually yields results, whether external or internal. I mean, it's usually a combination of our environment and what we're consuming, and our perception, and what we gather from that. Right? It's what makes our work unique and special.
Yeah,
Which is
totally.
really, yeah. It doesn't have to get any more complicated than that. Um, some people just see different things. I think that's the unique gift in any craft,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? So the second book, Clarity and Connection, and this is focused on understanding how past wounds are present in our relationships, or how they impact and are present in our relationships. How did this one come about?
This one, it felt like a pretty natural transition, right? The idea of the first one was just totally focusing on the individual. It was like, this is about personal transformation, and the next ring out from there was, our relationships, our friendships with our
Yeah,
friends, with our families, with, our intimate partners. Um, because it really felt like the whole real arc of this whole Young Pueblo work is, trying to add that support for people to take their personal transformation seriously, because if they're able to love and know themselves more, then they're going to be less likely to harm other people. So if we're
Mm,
really trying to build a better world, people need to learn how to love themselves, and people need to know themselves well, because then they're going to just come up with a lot better solutions and be much more compassionate with each other. Um, but I started realizing that the building blocks of society are in our relationships, right? Like
yeah.
first they're inside of you, inside of your perception, but then outside of that, it's like, if I can't treat my loved ones, the people that I interact with well, then of course, like, I'm not going to care for society. So if we can, then it kind of just clicked, like, let's focus on our immediate connections and see how can we make them more harmonious, and tie back the development of the harmony between me and other people with the development of the harmony inside of myself, and making that strong connection so that people can just love each other a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The world would definitely be a much better place um, if people were thinking from that perspective. I want to ask you, because I mean, one thing that I've noticed through my work is that we often hang on to relationships, sometimes forever, and not to say that they were always bad or always creating emotionally charged situations, like whatever the case is. I mean, there's often a gratitude from that past relationship or how it started, but I think there's also an art to acknowledging or realizing that maybe that relationship doesn't serve us anymore, and it's so hard to, like, how do you let that go, right? And have you what are your thoughts on that one? Because I think that's a big one people
Yeah, no,
struggle with,
I
myself
think
included.
it's hard. I mean, I've been in situations like that too in the past, and sometimes you have to let go 1,000 times, and that's
Mm,
fine. Because especially if the connection is so deep and it's been a long lasting one. I remember hearing something like a few years ago, and I forget who it comes from, but the measurement was that if the breakup will take half the time of the relationship. And it's funny because I had this, but like, I'm with my wife now. We've been together for a long time, but before then, I had a great relationship with someone, and our relationship was 2 years long, and the breakup took a whole year.
wow.
so,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
but that's the reality of it. People, they move at their own pace, and even back then, that was a time before boundaries. So like, boundaries, people are understanding, like, oh, this is right. Like, even though this is hard for me, I should set up this boundary now so that I can more easily move forward with my life. But when you're, sort of like living without this information, what can you really do but go through that slow back and forward and allow it to be a gradual process?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's helpful. It's really helpful, because I mean, it's definitely something that I think we all have to face or work through. Um, and as you're mentioning, obviously you wrote a whole book on the topic, but relationships are so important in our lives. So, I mean, you have to look at both sides and prioritize them, right? There's just so many angles there.
totally, totally.
I have a formatting question that I would love to ask,
Sure.
because I love it, but I feel like I feel like my publisher would be yelling at me all the time. But what's with the dropping of the capital letters? What's behind that?
um, it's just inspired by bell hooks and by Rupi Kaur. I
Okay,
just like capital letters. They don't look that good.
I
I think
agree. I
I think
agree.
it,
For the record,
I think it looks great in a nonfiction book, but like, if it's a poetry book and it's a book about minimalism, like, part of the attraction is design.
yeah,
And to me, like, that seamlessness of all lowercase letters, like, it just looks beautiful,
yeah,
And also, you can drop so much punctuation too, depending on the way that you shape the poem, so that people can just read it. So I don't know. I feel like all of language is constantly in motion, right?
yeah,
Like, English didn't exist like 700 years ago, like 1,000 years ago. Like, all these languages, they developed by people just like being like, oh, you know what? I just made up a new word and I'm going to use it. And I'm going to
yeah.
go ahead and just like do this thing. So I allow myself that flexibility because don't know, that's part of being creative. Like, why am I just going to do what everyone else is doing?
Well, I for one love it, and I mean, even reading your bio, it's formatted in the same way. I mean, it seems to be part of your DNA and your writing, and there is something to it that obviously it's you see it or you notice it right away because we're not used to seeing that. So that's to me a great way to pause. But there is, I mean, and you just explained that there's an intention behind that, but I do feel like there's a lighter or a lightness to it. It's
Yeah,
just it's not so formal or so
totally.
serious.
And the other aspect of it too is that it's all of that work. A lot of those pieces, they were like about my life in specific, but a lot of them are not. A lot of them are just observations. So I think the lowercase helps it to be more general. So when I say I'm not really talking about me, I'm talking about all of us.
Yeah.
It's literally for the people that this piece immediately resonates with. If it doesn't resonate with you, go to the other page. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Well, I mean, I highly encourage everyone to pick up both books. The new book, by the time this is out, it should be available. It's going to be available end of April, right? I believe.
Yeah. April 27th.
Okay, so there might be might be right on by the time this is released, but regardless, everything will be up in the show notes for the books. I do want to, before we wrap, do want to ask a little bit about just your regular routine,
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
the
Please. Yeah.
mornings look like or the evenings look like. Because again, those are usually littered full of really cool practices or ideas for everyone listening, and myself included. So, yeah, what's it look like for a day in a life?
So I wake up, and the first thing I do is, wake up, go to the bathroom, and then go meditate.
Okay.
Yeah, so I meditate an hour in the morning. That's how I start off my day. And after that, I'll like start checking in on work. I'll make myself this like really healthy shake that my wife and I have been, like structuring and restructuring over the years.
Yeah.
So I'll have that for breakfast, and it's totally inspired by Dr. Marc. I don't know if
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
his work is amazing.
Yeah.
He like listening to his suggestions. I mean, they have totally and just really added a lot to my life.
He I'm currently on his protocol of his right now. I've been on these heartburn meds for the longest time and just hated and knew intuitively inside that, like, yeah, it's helping with symptoms, but like I'm probably
It's
just
not
destroying my gut, right?
exactly. Yeah,
So yeah, I've been following a lot of his like big diet changes and just some supplements
yeah,
to come
yeah.
off, and he's incredible.
Yeah, I randomly, I think my wife found out about him and wanted to try his like 10-day detox. And then
Yeah.
we both did it. And I was like, whoa, like I've never felt like this before. And
Yeah.
then we just like changed our lifestyle to, basically fit that for most of our days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, I cut you off. You have the shake.
Yeah, we're like nerding out on health.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I just start, either like thinking about writing a new post and like checking in with myself and seeing like what is coming up in terms of like what's actually developed. Like a lot of times I will have like the beginnings of an idea, but I'll realize that it literally needs to mature. Like I'll need to let it just sit there for like another month, and as it like keeps coming up and becomes like more and more mature. So I'll like try to measure out. I also like started trying to really feel out like, do I have that specific creative energy this morning? And I'm just like staying really attuned to that. And when I feel it, like I take the leap. I try to create something new.
Okay.
I really like Rick Rubin's Instagram, where he's like posting creative advice, and that's one of the things I got from him. He was like, "Do it when you feel it. Like, don't save it for later. When you really
Yeah.
feel it, like I got to write this down now. Like, do it now."
Yeah.
And if not, like I've written enough things that I'll check back and see what fits this day, and then share that on this day.
Okay.
And then after that, it's a lot of just like administrative things. Like I'll, a lot of emailing, and a lot of writing. Like I finished my second book, but I'm also working on a third one.
Yeah.
And I'm spending a lot of time writing that. That's also going to be my first nonfiction book, which I'm pretty pumped about
Oh,
too.
cool. Oh, we'll
Yeah.
have to definitely jam again when that, because I'm so curious, being someone writing a nonfiction now, like what it would be like switching into fiction. Like it must be just completely different, or maybe
Yeah.
not. I don't know.
Yeah, luckily it's not too big of a shift because I really love essay writing.
Oh yeah,
And I've also, I've had a lot of practice like speaking in public before the pandemic. So this is the stuff that I would talk about.
yeah.
Um, but this one will have capital letters and good
Oh, come on.
and good punctuation. So
Okay,
yeah.
that's funny.
Yeah.
And then just lastly, like, what's the wind down routine look like in the evenings?
The wind down, it's basically, we I call it quits with work usually between 5 and 6,
Okay,
and then we'll make dinner and then watch a little bit of TV and meditate for another hour. So I meditate 2 hours a day every day,
okay,
and those are like the two pillars of my day.
yeah,
And I do that, like no matter what, like whatever is happening, I'm meditating 2 hours a day, no matter how great or how bad I feel.
okay,
And that's been like literally just the best investment I've ever made, by far, because like how can I not invest in my own like
yeah,
happiness and freedom?
totally.
Yeah, and that's basically it, and then yeah, till the next day.
Yeah. Love it. I mean, for me, it's journaling is kind of the same thing. Those two
Awesome.
pillars, and I feel the same way. It's just which is a form of meditation, depending on how you look at all of this,
Hmm.
or a practice in itself, I guess. But yeah, it helps so much, and it's just such a great bookend or start and a bookend to the day. That and there's a ton of there's a ton of health benefits also, obviously, if for your sleep. And speaking of Marc Hyman, and I did a whole health series with a couple of functional medicine docs in Houston not long ago, and everything was coming back to some sort of mindfulness practice and prioritizing your sleep. Like those were the staples, no matter whether we're talking to geneticists or functional medicine docs or sports psychologists, is all coming back to those things. So you really can't go wrong.
No, and it's amazing too, because like I have so many friends who've picked up a meditation practice or mindfulness practice, and the results are just huge. Like if you got to learn how to train your mind the same way that you have to learn how to eat healthy and learn how to exercise your body, like, or the same way that you like take a shower and brush your teeth, like how are you not going to wash out your mind at the end of
Yeah,
the day? Yeah.
yeah. There's the title for the show, Washing Out Your Mind with Diego. I love it. That is awesome. Well, honestly, my man, I can't thank you for your time and, just energy towards this interview and this conversation, but a higher thank you, obviously, from myself, everyone listening, and everyone that has been and will be touched by your work, and you dedicating your energy to showing up the best you can, and taking the time to go inward so that you can help so many other people. I mean, thank you for that, 'cause that's such a beautiful thing to put out in the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel really fortunate that I have a clear way to serve people, to be really honest. Yeah, I really like to
Yeah,
think of Young Pueblo as a way to serve.
love it.